Hello everybody, croeso a diolch am ymuno gyda ni heddiw. Thanks for joining this session. I'm afraid we can't, because of technology, have simultaneous translation at this event, but all of the activity around it will be bilingual, and you can please feel free to put chat in Welsh in the chat box and we can translate afterwards, but not during the session. So I'm Anna Nicol, I'm Director of Strategy and Sector Development in WCVA. And thank you for joining us for the fourth of our Different Futures Wales Ddyfodol, Gwahanol Cymru sessions. This is part of a series of 6 sessions where we're bringing together organisations from across the voluntary sector and beyond to discuss the impact of COVID-19, but especially what the implications might be for the future. We know that there are different possibilities for the future emerging, good or bad, and we want to be looking at what action we might all need to take in order to steer towards a better future. So this session is on influencing and engagement. As well as this, we've asked people to do a survey when they join the session, and there's a general survey as well that's out there. So thank you for everybody who's contributing to those. We will be pulling together the content that comes out of these with key messages for government and others. Richard Newton is joining us to write be drafting these reports after the sessions, and Jess Blair's going to be writing a blog which should be out early next week. So as Rodri said, please do keep the conversation going on at hashtag Different Futures Wales or hashtag Ddyfodol Gwahanol Cymru. I'll hand over to Stephen Brooks to chair the session. Steve's a trustee of WCVA and also Executive Director of Policy and External Affairs for Sustrans UK. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Anna, and welcome to everybody on the call today. Obviously, as we all know, the impact of coronavirus has affected many aspects of our work in the voluntary sector, and it's meant that decision makers are working in crisis management mode. It's not business as usual for any of us in the sector, and it's not business as usual for anyone in government or indeed across the public sector. And of course, that poses some big questions and big challenges about how we prepare for a different future and influence policy ahead of next year's Senedd elections. And that's our focus for today's discussions. As Anna said, some of you have already provided thoughts via the Eventbrite survey. Issues around time, capacity, access to decision makers have been raised. There are points of optimism, I think, around the confidence of the sector, a strengthening sense of partnership, issues around utilisation of technology, and perhaps a growing understanding in many of our worlds of an urgency attached to our agendas. But there are obviously notes of caution. It's been a difficult time for lots of charities, particularly those who work with the most vulnerable. So today is really an opportunity to unpack, explore some of those issues, and as Anna said, to develop some key messages, some kind of key asks, which we can relay to decision makers and others. So we're going to explore the questions. We've got 4 overall questions for us to explore over the next hour or so. The first is on what has been the impact on influencing policy and wider decision makers so far. So we're looking at how coronavirus has impacted on the day-to-day influencing of policy and our access to and engagement with decision makers. So I'm going to ask Ben if there's any any initial kind of thoughts and reflections from anybody on the call that we want to bring in first.
Thank you, Steve. So far, no one's indicated in the chat function, and I'd obviously encourage people to do so. In the initial survey that people filled out before coming to the event, the main topics were, as you discussed, around time and capacity and accessibility, and some of the comments that we pulled out from Macmillan Cancer Support and the Lloyds Bank Foundation are interesting if either of those people were on the call and wanted to talk about accessibility or about in the case of Lloyds Bank Foundation, the more positive profile the sector's developed during the last few months.
So does anybody want to perhaps pick up that point that Ben raised about access? How have people found influencing decision makers over the last few weeks and months? Has it been easier? Has it been harder? Have you found it's been easier to kind of relay your policy asks to decision makers? Where have the barriers been?
So Steve, Sharon Thompson has indicated she'd like to speak.
Okay, Sharon. Perhaps you could tell us, Sharon, where you're from as well, as we bring you in. We always talk about the wonder of technology during this time, but I think
you're muted. Sorry, Sharon.
There we are. I, for one, are still getting to grips with MS Teams. While we're unmuting Sharon, if there's anybody else who also wants to come in, just let Ben know in the sidebar in the chat section.
Okay. Perhaps we can call Caroline Howe in while Sharon is using the technology.
Okay, Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline from Lloyds Bank Foundation. Just to pick up on that point about access and engagement around policy, we found that government they're really in need of solutions. So they're relatively keen to talk to find out, well, about what is happening on the ground, because I mean, we work across England and Wales, and Welsh government have been much better than Westminster government in terms of listening and acting. But I think where there's a real opportunity for charities, because nobody really knows what to do, what's going to happen. So any solutions that can be offered and kind of demonstrate how important charities are, then I feel that there are potentially some more opportunities. But also, as the coronavirus has shone a spotlight on issues that already existed, but they've amplified them and made them worse. And so where things are being introduced in the short term to try and address some of those issues, how can you keep them, and how can you make the case for longer term change?
Fantastic. And I think that point about, I mean, the initial discussion, I think, focuses on what has changed, but I think we will come on to kind of how can we embed that change, whether it's an increased understanding of an agenda or whether it's kind of a better new type of working. We can perhaps come on to that. But it's kind of interesting, Caroline, I think you work across kind of a number of sectors, and your reflections are broad.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we work with small charities, but working across a range of basic social welfare issues.
Yeah.
Steve, Andy Glide would like to come in if that's okay, and then there's comments from Juliet from Care and Repair and Katie Chappelle. If either of them want to expand on them, we'd be happy to hear from you. Just indicate in the chat comments.
Fantastic. Hi, Andy.
Hi. Yeah, I'm from Cancer Research UK. For those I've not had the pleasure to meet before, and just because Macmillan raised it, we work very closely with Macmillan, particularly over the last few months with everything on COVID and impact on cancer as well. So I've shared a lot of the challenges that they faced as well in terms of access. And I think particularly difficult for those of us in the health sector, because people have been pulled all over the place to focus on COVID. And if you're lucky, then someone else has been redeployed into covering some of that area, but obviously they're not got the policy expertise in a lot of cases. And it has proved to be really challenging to get access to have that kind of, for a two-way relationship, not just about, trying to find out what's happening, but also to, share intel that we're hearing on the ground and the impact of COVID on cancer and suggest, policy suggestions as well. So that does seem to be improving now. Certainly cancer policy leads in Welsh Government are kind of back in place. Not working quite as much on COVID as they were, but trying to get that headspace of, how do you get cancer services back up and running is a really difficult one at the moment.
Mm. And cancer is one of the kind of the I suppose sectors within the wider charity sector, which is well networks, well kind of coalitioned, if that's a word. How has it impacted how you work with other charities?
So you're right. It's well established that we have something called the World Cancer Alliance. That has been around for years. It's a help and a hindrance a lot of the time. Welsh Government would rather talk to an alliance rather than individual charities. So it can be difficult to get your individual nuances in for different charities with that scenario. But being able to speak with one voice has made such a difference, and I think more so than ever, you know, we've been able to get that cut through, and you know, hearing from others that, you know, cancer's had a lot of attention during all of this, and I don't want to get into that argument, but I think partly that is because we've been able to speak loudly and effectively with one voice in a way that, while we always collaborate, never to this level, I think, which certainly benefited us and the people that we're representing.
Steve, Megan Thomas would like to come on this issue, and then Sharon Thompson we're able to go back to now. So
Hi, Megan. Hi, Megan.
Hi. Just so something that we've noticed with Disability Wales is that in terms of during the pandemic, the conversation has switched from being around a social model to focusing more on a medical model of disability, especially when we're talking in the health and the social care sector. So with language around things like vulnerable people and the way that we are, and our attitudes towards the disabled people and people with disabilities during this. And that's something that we found frustrating, because it's very much trying to reassert the importance of the social model.
And the disability sector have been working hard for years to kind of change that perception and develop policymakers' understanding. Do you have any sense of kind of why things have perhaps gone backwards in terms of their understanding on that?
I think things have gone backwards just in terms of people. It's just not at the forefront of people's minds. I think it's just it's more of an afterthought to policymakers at the moment, and so that is what our work has been doing to make sure that it is something that is being considered at all stages.
Perhaps it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on what the future might look like for the disability sector when we come on to that a little bit later. But if Sharon's ready and mic'd up, perhaps we can go to Sharon. Hello.
Thanks. Apologies for that. I had to leave and come back again to activate my microphone for some reason. I'm Sharon Thompson. I'm Head of Policy and Advocacy in RSPB Cymru, and along with a range of other environmental NGOs, we work together under Wales Environment Link. So obviously the natural environment, climate change, those are our issues of interest. I think what we find is actually after, I suppose, the initial panic around lockdown anyway, that actually access to Welsh Government, particularly on the political side, has been quite good, quite positive. I think we're in a period of time where people are looking to what are the new ideas as we go forward. And so there are people who are sort of, you know, really interested and want to hear what we've got to say. I would say the Welsh Government officials probably struggling a bit more. You know, they're doing a lot, so they don't have quite the same capacity to talk to us. But the one area that I found interesting, and I haven't heard all of the conversation because, as I say, I had to leave. Other people have said that they've had quite good access to Welsh Government. But what about opposition politicians? We've had practically nothing from them because they're not interested in anything that isn't directly COVID. So while we're chatting to the government politically, we're not chatting to any of the opposition politicians because they're just not in that space yet. And when will they be? Particularly, as you say, we've got elections coming up soon. So
really important points there. And I think for us to remember that actually when we talk about influencing government, we're also talking about there's the political side, there's the elected members as well as the civil servants, the officials, and of course Sharon reminds us about the important point of opposition parties in this. Obviously, our minds are kind of into the middle distance and thinking about the Senate elections that we presume will go ahead next May 2021. And again, it'd be interesting to hear people's thoughts about how their plans for engaging opposition parties, and indeed all parties, may change or may not because of the pandemic. I know a lot of us go to conferences, hold fringes, take part in roundtables, publish manifestos, all of that kind of tricks of the trade. How is that going to change because of the pandemic? Ben? So
Steve, Juliet Morris and Katie Chappell have both indicated they want to speak, and there's a bit of a conversation going on in the chat about perspectives from community-based organisations. So if any of them would like to speak on how they found engaging with local organisations as well as national or local government as well as national government, and that would be helpful to hear as well, I think.
Yeah, and also I suppose public services as well, particularly locally organised public services like the NHS, perhaps. Juliet, I think you're muted. There we are. Hi,
Yep,
Juliet.
okay. Just
Welcome.
managed, that was very slow. Yeah, it was, I suppose, really picking up on your public service thing, really, just to echo, obviously, things that other people have said, Work for Caring and Repair Cymru, and we've had fantastic conversations with Welsh Government, really been brought in absolutely for our sort of experience and expertise and our link to the front line. So that's been really fantastic and very positive. But what I do think has been evident is that if you don't necessarily fit a public service model, a really traditional public service model, it becomes quite tricky. So because we operate at a sort of intersect around housing, health and social care, it's been really difficult to get Welsh Government to respond specifically to the needs of our frontline teams, for example, really basic stuff around PPE, whether we're a priority, and then a little bit of falling apart around the sort of regime within which our frontline caseworkers in particular are operating. So we have caseworkers who work within an NHS context who are subject to different rules, different environment than, for example, our community-based casework teams. So there's something there for us around the fact that sort of almost history prevails, the history of our great connectivity. So if you have good communications with Welsh Government and what have you, those can continue, but it's a really difficult environment in which to develop anything more nuanced, more new. But also history will prevail in terms of silos and that slightly reductive withdrawal to understanding health in one context, social care in another context, housing in another context.
Perhaps Juliet could stay on for a second. There's definitely a theme, I think, emerging, which is about reverting to type, whether that's what policymakers are interested in, how traditional relationships have worked. But I just wondered, Juliet, the IWA last week had quite a lot of discussion about how public sector bodies were collaborating at a local level. I just wondered if you had additional comment about how easy or difficult it was to kind of partake in that collaboration.
Okay, so I work at a national level, but one of the things I have been doing has been working with Welsh Government, developing information to go out to vulnerable groups, particularly through the food parcels, which of course were being coordinated locally, and talking to our local agencies. It became very clear that, I mean, some have absolutely no idea what was going on locally. So I think, again, the revert to type thing there is it really depends on the area and how genuinely embedded the local authorities are in terms of working with local groups. It was unbelievably diverse. Some people didn't even know there were food parcels going to be going out to vulnerable people, whereas other teams had already been hooked in and were doing deliveries and that sort of thing. So really mixed feel on the ground there.
Thank you. Ben, could you remind me who's?
Yeah, Katie Chappell, and then Jackie Dorian is going to speak on the community influencing as well.
Brilliant. I would just remind everybody, please keep your mics muted and your cameras off, otherwise you may well inadvertently feature on the screen. Katie, hello.
Hi, yeah, I work for the Stroke Association, and sort of in response to your first point, which is about how easy you found it to influence at the moment, I think because we are in that health arena, we found it incredibly difficult. I can give you a really good example is that through our cross-party group for the last almost a year, we've been carrying out a report, an inquiry to write a report into the government's delivery plan on stroke. We launched that report on the 24th of March, so just as we went into lockdown. And it was so difficult because it was the culmination of, you know, a year's work, so much time and effort and so much opportunity for change, and very little interest in that report because the people that we're talking to all have health on the agenda, and of course rightly we're all focused on COVID. And we even had a letter from Andrew Goodall, Chief Exec of the NHS, that said, you know, to paraphrase, your report was really good, really interesting. We will look at it at some point, but don't contact me at the moment because all I can do is COVID. And so, you know, it's just been incredibly difficult. And when it comes to manifestos, I think we've just put everything on hold. We've had to furlough our policy officer anyway. And so I am a bit concerned about a lack of progress around issues that are quite critical for us in stroke at the moment. However, on the flip side, I think there have been some positives for the short term. So although influencing has been really disrupted, I think the fact that clinicians have been pulled in elsewhere, so clinicians usually focusing on stroke have been pulled in to deal with COVID wards or have been pushed to clear beds much more quickly than they usually would. It's meant that we've kind of found an opportunity to do a few things. One of them is we've stepped in to kind of be that independent convening group, I suppose, and pull together clinicians to start sharing best practice across Wales and then with the rest of the UK, because obviously we're a UK-wide organisation, which has been helpful. And we've sort of seen that opportunity to step in and convene that as a group and start working a bit better together. So that's something we've wanted to do for a while, and COVID has given us that opportunity to do it. And then the other thing is that our services teams have been quite agile and have been able to step in and say, well, you've got to clear beds more quickly because of COVID, so how about if you give us some money, we could support with these services for people being discharged from hospital. So although the influencing has been very difficult, I think it's also presented quite a lot of opportunities for us as an organisation as well.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. A lot of food for thought there, Ben. I'm thinking it'd be good to kind of get different takes in terms of charities which provide services or predominantly provide services versus those which kind of perhaps exclusively just campaign. There was something there for me as well about kind of almost license or legitimacy to start going back to government and talking about the things we want to talk about. We want to be useful and we want to help during a national emergency, but also we've got a duty to act in the benefit, in the interest of our beneficiaries, and there are some things that need saying, and we'll be thinking about when do we say them. I think Jackie's next, if she is ready on.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm here.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. Jackie Dorian from Carmarthenshire Association of Voluntary Services. So I just wanted to mention that, you know, we've got over 300 community groups in Carmarthen, or Carmarthenshire rather, and they actually went to work before they even knew about lockdown. So lots of communities looking after their own local community. I had spoke to somebody the other day that actually their community no longer needs to go to any supermarket because they're all very self-sufficient in that area now. And we've seen that across West Wales, you know, where people have gone into action, local volunteers, local people looking after local people, really community led. And actually some of the policy that has come out has been really, really late. We've not had anything that gives us guide. Well, we have now, but the guidance that is coming out is actually we're not sharing that with anybody because it's not relevant to them, because they're doing what they need to do locally and don't need strategy and policy. I mean, Ruth, obviously, for WCVA has now got more inroads into Welsh Government to have more influence. But, you know, I think sometimes it's a little bit too little and too late. You know, particularly when I hear that we've got families out there eating bread and butter. We've got older people eating bread and butter to sustain themselves. I just want to make a plea here about the food parcels as well. Food parcels for shielded people, they're long life products within them, no healthy fruit and vegetables in them, not catered for with regards to any intolerances that people have or may have, and also in relation to pharmacy delivery, so slow getting information from Welsh Government on what is actually happening with support for pharmacies and for people's prescriptions to be delivered. So whilst we've got lots of influencing going on with national organisations there, I think, you know, we've got to remember those small community groups that are doing a massive amount of work and actually didn't need any policy, any strategy. They just went to work and without any guidance at all.
I think perhaps, Jackie, that's an example of community groups reverting to type, which is rolling their sleeves up, pitching in and actually having a direct impact really quickly.
Yes, yeah. And still continuing to do that. And, you know, as we potentially get a couple more waves of this, which could be more dire for us over in West Wales, you know, keeping those groups active and people keen to continue is really, really important from our perspective.
Yeah. Thanks, Jackie. And you raised the issue about what happens next. It'd be good to start moving into considerations around what's the implication for the voluntary sector in Wales, what could we do, and what could the WCVA do, what could government do, and what could other decision makers do to steer us towards a better future. And are there any more?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things come up in the chat comment. Firstly, Pat from Citizens Advice Swansea Newport Talbot is asking about how we can campaign to hold on to some of the gains, and he's listed the £20 per week uplift in universal credit, but people might have suggestions on some of the policy changes that have been beneficial that have happened as a result of COVID-19 and how we look to maintain those going forward rather than be seen as exceptional. And then there's some conversation for people outside of the health sector who obviously have a different approach to how they're influencing during a global health pandemic. I'm hoping some people from some of those organisations might have some thoughts they might want to contribute.
Right, so that's a really interesting one that Pat's raising about how do we make permanent some of the temporary policy changes. I certainly have seen kind of things that we might have argued before the pandemic, which were seemingly impossible or pipe dreams or unaffordable, have been brought in with relative ease in some areas. And the question is, how do we bank those wins? How do we make sure that those kind of temporary changes are made permanent? Who should we bring in first then?
Or while people are cogitating on that issue, Steve, Sue Leonard from Pembrokeshire would like to come in on community stuff.
Okay, hi Sue.
Words, not mine.
Hi Sue.
Hi, I'm just going to switch my camera on as well. So Sue Leonard, I'm Chief Officer of Pembrokeshire Association of Voluntary Services in Pembrokeshire, and working really closely with CAV. So great to see Jackie on the call and Cavo across West Wales. And I think that, you know, we are seeing a very similar picture. I'm sure it's recognisable across most of Wales, if not all of Wales, where local groups and local people have really sprung into action and have been absolutely fantastic. And I echo what Jackie has said. I mean, you know, they got cracking, got going, and actually when they came up against a few problems like volunteer IDs and various other things, they just solved them. You know, we helped, I think, with a sort of county response a couple of weeks after they had solved their issues locally, and then I think the national ID scheme came in a couple of weeks after that. So, you know, people on the ground are very agile and they've got lots of skills and lots of talents and abilities. And actually, I think what I think we have an opportunity for now is to really build on that as a solid foundation for something we've been trying to influence on for a long time, which is to invest in that sort of asset-based, citizen-led approach to community economic development. You know, we almost have right happening in front of us now, the strongest evidence base for that kind of investment that we'll ever get from any consultation or, you know, having consultants come in and tell us what we should and should not be doing. We've got it happening right in front of us. We can see how powerful it is. We need to build on that foundation. And I think when you look at the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the framework that's set in that act, that we really have not capitalised on, you know, looking at things like having a wellbeing economy, having a green contract, having short supply chains, working differently, building volunteering in, thinking about citizens, not consumers. You know, we've got an opportunity now to influence through what we can see happening in front of us. So I think it's quite a powerful base from which we can influence.
Thanks, Sue. Quite a powerful, I think, articulation of what a better future might look like. I was also got me thinking about where I think Sue said hello to Jackie, her neighbour, is the extent to which perhaps more locally based members and charities and organisations feel connected to one another. We shouldn't just think about national organisations or indeed kind of the connectedness of the sector in general to government in general? What does it feel like if you're a local group without the kind of resources of a larger organisation? Has that connectedness improved or not? Ben, who have we got next?
So we're just waiting for people to indicate that they'd like to speak, but I think Sue raised a really good point about the Future Generations Act and the opportunity that that has provided with us within Wales, and obviously applies sort of national and community-led groups, and might be one of the areas where we can use some examples of the coming together that's happened during this this time to demonstrate how the Future Generations Act can be applied more effectively in future. So I don't know if anyone has any examples like that of how some of the ways of working that have developed around influencing can be sustained going forward, or has similar thoughts about how the particular legislative framework in Wales can be amended to facilitate some of that coming together in the longer term.
That would be good. We often go to these conferences, hear about the Act and see case studies on PowerPoint, but I think we've all kind of witnessed case studies out of our windows, so it'd be good to hear about that. Sue also raised the point about evidence, and I think for some charities there'll be kind of real-time demonstrations of the kind of things they say should be happening. So interesting if there's any thoughts on how people have been kind of capturing the evidence of change and how they're going to use that in the future to influence. So do we have any takers on the future? How confident do people feel? That's an interesting one, because I think in the Eventbrite survey, a number of you expressed kind of, I think, confidence in the sector, this kind of growing sense of we're working together, we're perhaps working a bit smarter as well. And that's not to, I think, draw our eyes away from some of the chronic need that existed before the pandemic and has only been made larger by the pandemic. But I just wondered how confident people are feeling about the future as well.
Steve, Valerie Woodgate would like to come in, and then Sharon Thompson afterwards.
Okay, hi Valerie.
Hello, just turning myself on. Actually, the pandemic, which is horrible, and I'm definitely in the age group that needs to self-isolate, because today, in a month's time, I go into my 80th year, and I still haven't had your old stay-at-home letter. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay. The pandemic has actually brought about some tremendous advantages in social life. The air that we breathe is cleaner, for a start. Can you see me okay? The air is clean. People are gardening like mad. I mean, it's just bizarre. I ordered a whole load of plants and not one was available. So I had to do some research and find local suppliers. So I got better plants at less cost. And it was a good thing that I wasn't able to order by mail. Many things that have happened because of this pandemic actually are things we can build on. What my project, Learn with Grandma, is about is something Sue was talking about just now, which is the skills and knowledge that we older people have got that need actually to be translated into this modern technology. Throughout the world, most older people still do not use technology, modern technology. I live in Motherwell, which is a village, well, we've got 30 houses, but half of them are shut at the minute. So we're a very small community. And I'm the only one here of the older generation that uses technology in the way that I do. They think I'm slightly mad that I do it, but it's a wonderful communication tool. When I started Learn with Grandma, I just floated my ideas on Facebook, and now it's in 54 countries, which is extraordinary. And all I'd like to say to everybody here is that anything that you are posting, which in any way encourages intergenerational learning and active aging, you can post on Learn with Grandma Wales. I might even then share it to international. But all of that is free publicity for what you're doing. And it's raising awareness that of this divide in the age gap. I remember one thing about this technology. My generation invented the bloody stuff.
So thanks, Valerie. It's great that you're using it, and it's great that you're able to join us. I think you remind us actually of actually different parts of Wales and different social groups within Wales will have different barriers and different needs and different opportunities. And I think the last seminar we had, the last webinar on delivering services, looked at the issue of tech and issues around who benefits, who doesn't benefit, came up there. But I think it is a question for us to hold on to as we move forward. I think we've got Sharon there as well.
And after Sharon, we've got Tom Archer, Steve, and there's also been a comment in the chat box around influencing party manifestos for the next election. So if anybody wants to come in on any thoughts they have about how best to do that, given that the times are particularly challenging for engagement at the moment, that'd be really helpful.
Great. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, thanks. I put some of it in the chat bar, but looking to the future, I think in terms of the natural environment, some of the behaviour changes that we've seen as a result of lockdown, as our previous speaker has said, it's horrible to talk about opportunities arising from such a terrible thing, but it has shown us what the future could be. And some of those insurmountable barriers don't look quite so tough anymore. You know, this is the time for us to be talking about, well, how do we fundamentally change the economies, and what are the things that we need to do? But it's how do we embed those behaviour changes that have been beneficial, so whether they be from the environmental side about people walking and cycling more, through to the social, doing things locally, and using technology more rather than travelling. But as well as that, I think there are opportunities that we haven't taken under the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act across the third sector as a whole. So the relationship between environment, health and well-being, social, we know that they're there, but we haven't really made those linkages. And those are things under the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act that are supposed to be there, but we haven't really done properly yet. So now is maybe our opportunity to do that. And these are some of the things, these long-term changes that we've been talking about for a long time, are some of the things that we're talking about in terms of manifesto asks. And I suppose we are going to try and do advocacy around manifestos in the way that we have done it for many years. It's just that we won't be doing it physically face-to-face, we'll be doing it remotely face-to-face. So coming back to my original point, it'll be interesting then how the engagement with the opposition parties will go. But I'm sure most of you are aware that Labour are currently asking for input into the development of their manifesto. So there are opportunities there. And if I can just say one more thing, because I think I saw on the sidebar, Anna asked what's the relationship with the UK element of bodies where, you know, in terms of devolved context. I think similar, well, I'd say most of the NGOs are doing a better job, at least in the environmental sector, than the government is. But there are lots of, what's the word? Yeah, there are lots of parallels in each of the countries, and particularly in the Celtic countries. So we're doing a lot of work with our colleagues asking for the same things in each of the different each of the different parliaments. The
collaboration outside of Wales as well as with. I think it was Tom next. Thanks, Sharon. I think, was it Tom next, Ben, that we wanted to bring? Tom, are you there? I think.
Hello.
There we are. Hi, Tom.
Hi, no. I mean, I didn't expect to talk. It was just picking up on the comments side in terms of how, when you want to look at policy, that the evidence base is vital, and there are a number of the third sector organisations that tend to be the larger ones, but have the ability to fund that research. And what we found, certainly in health, clinically, is that we need to understand what's happening now. COVID-19 isn't going away, so there is a new way of working for health as well. And the reliance on third sector involvement still supporting that is going to be absolutely vital. But I think that also transcends other areas around the third sector that we work with, if you were to apply it to kind of Future Generations Act.
Which organisation are you from, Tom?
Clinically, I work with the Air Ambulance, so that's a kind of charity third sector, but I'm NHS by background.
Yeah.
I then work with a number of other areas with regards to Save a Life Cymru and how we look at survival from out of hospital cardiac arrest in Wales.
And it's, I think, a really important point that we can, I don't think anybody has on the call, but there is a danger that we can think COVID-19 is an issue that we will move beyond, and then we will be into the future, and that future might be better, it might be worse, but it'll be different. But I think Tom rightly reminds that actually potentially COVID-19 isn't going to go away. There may be further spikes, but life might permanently change, and that has an impact on our agendas. I don't know if anybody picked up on your point.
So Steve, there's been a couple of people comment on it on the chat box. If any of them would like to offer some of their experience in detail, including Nesta Lloyd-Jones, Martin Fiddler-Jones, and Claire O'Shea. Just if any of you have any experience on developing your own manifesto or seeking to influence party political manifestos. And then just while the people are discussing that, someone, I've lost the comment, but has raised a point about the engaging around those issues which disproportionately impact people from BAME communities. So if anyone would like to come forward on that, please say so in the comment box. Claire's raised her hand, Steve, if that helps.
Hi, Claire.
Hiya. I'll come in on that one. Presumably you can hear me. I hate doing this bit. I've also just noticed something horrible. I've got a Snapchat camera that might kick in and I might turn into an avocado any minute. So apologies if that happens. I have no control over the tech today. On the point about manifestos, I feel like the parties are getting ahead of themselves much faster than they would have done normally, because they're able to focus a little bit more. So we feel like we're slightly behind when normally we feel like we're ahead of the game. The other points on manifestos that I think are quite important at the moment is how you can honestly kind of broker what you're going to be doing in 5 years' time, and not letting COVID become the only thing that you're talking about, because there is going to be a world post-COVID, which we need to kind of envision, and it's really, really difficult. And the other point on manifestos, I work at Hub Cymru Africa, which is an international development organisation. Previously, I've worked, funny enough, it's Stroke Association, where someone else on the call is from, and a couple of other organisations, where we've been really, really collaborative in our manifesto development, being very careful not to be kind of policy people in a room presuming we know what we're doing. Where we've been able to organise events, really bring people into kind of rich conversations about what we should be saying in our manifestos. That's much more difficult for us at the moment, because the timeline is longer, because you're having to kind of have individual conversations or going out through Zoom. So you don't get as good a conversation. You're not just hearing people organically talking to each other. You're having to construct a conversation, which we haven't necessarily had to do. People are less engaged in policy discussions. So we've always been able to hold events and form policy on the back of those events, whereas at the moment we aren't able to do that. So you can't tag it on the end of an event and try and surmise what people are thinking. And we're also really conscious at the moment about technology. I've really been talking about technology is a really, really great tool to break down barriers and get more people involved in our conversations. And naively, I thought we were doing a really good job, but I've had a couple of conversations with some disability organisations actually who flagged that the conversations online are actually very difficult for people with different disabilities, particularly hearing problems, learning disabilities. A couple of people we've been working with have on the spectrum, so have much more difficulty reading conversations when they're not in the room looking for cues and things. So that's been quite significant. And similarly, tech is actually a massive barrier. So the very people that we want to be advocating on behalf of, which are often Southern partners in the Global South, Africa, we've been having better conversations, and that's been a real highlight for us, but we're still excluding the same people that we were excluding before, both in Wales and in the Global South, simply because they can't access data, can't afford data, can't access tech. Laptops and things are being used as educational tools, so people aren't able to come and speak to us during the kind of 9 to 5 hours. So the manifesto development process at the moment is happening in a very kind of introspective way, and I really want to find ways of changing that, or making sure the manifesto process doesn't close down before we've had an opportunity to really work in a different way or explore purposeful or good ways of working. So I guess talking at length, but they're my main points on manifesto development at the moment.
Thanks, Claire. The international development sector is one with really strong kind of participatory methods. And I think you've really underlined the difficulty that a sector that does have that kind of outreach is experiencing when it's trying to form policy. And now more than ever, the need to be participatory and to hear different voices and have those voices have a say over what policy we should be advocating has never been greater. And perhaps I think that's one of the key takeaways on this is citizen and beneficiary participation in the process. I think we've got 2 Fiddler Joneses who are lined up. Oh, you're on mute, I think, Ben.
Apologies.
Sorry.
Yeah, so Nesta Lloyd-Jones and Martin Fiddler-Jones have been commenting on the similar issues in the chat comments. If they would like to speak, that would be really helpful, I think, for the conversation.
Yeah. Hi, Nesta.
Hello, so I'll go first. So I work for the Welsh NHS Confederation, so we support the NHS leaders in Wales. So as you can imagine, it's been a very, very busy time for our members. I think in regards to the election, as Jess has highlighted and Martin's highlighted, both Labour and Welsh Conservatives are have an open consultation at the moment, and I guess for us we've got our calls, but a lot has happened in the last 2 months in regards to COVID, and a lot of the challenges that the NHS has faced historically, whether it's around digital and technology, there has been quite a lot of innovation, and I think for us it's a question of how do we ensure that continues. And the innovation continues, and some of the service changes that have come about continue. So I know there's a lot of work happening there in the same time as when we've got an election coming up in 12 months. So, we're trying to update our briefing and liaise and engage with the political parties at a time when our members are still responding to the pandemic. So it's quite difficult to be balancing both of them, and we don't know what 6 months is going to look like and what services are going to look like in 6 months' time as well. So yes, that's an overview from me.
Thanks, Nesta. I'm conscious of time, so shall we go straight to Martin?
Yeah, thanks, guys. And just to add to the previous conversation, we launched our manifesto in February. There's been quite a lot of work gone into that, collaborative across the organisation, identify right from prevention through to palliative care what we were focused on as a cancer charity. As I said in my earlier comments, quite a lot of the things we're advocating have been seen as actually were aspirational and now essential, and that's a really positive thing, and probably reduces the amount we need to advocate for that, with the caveat that I think we all need to be mindful that we don't go back to the status quo ante once this passes. I think a lot of us are quite encouraged by the positive changes that have been made, but it's very easy to slip back into old habits again. And others are things like cancer screening services that have been suspended as a result of COVID. Cancer has very much been knocked off its pedestal as a result of COVID for some understandable reasons, not all of which I share, but there you go. And therefore, there's an entirely plausible argument to say that we need to rewrite or refresh our manifesto, which took a substantial amount of internal resource to do. But we're currently living in this limbo where time seems to have frozen and also is continuing at pace at the same time. And 1 year away is a very long time nowadays. You used to say a week is a long time in politics, but a year right now is more like a decade. So potentially looking to see what elements of our manifesto have potentially been achieved, within a month of it being launched, due to completely unforeseen circumstances, and others that need to have completely new chapters in them.
Thanks, thanks, Martin. I liked your line around things which were once seen as aspirational are now seen as essential. I think Nesta's point around, I suppose it's not just what policies need to change, but how kind of working relationships and practices need to change and where improvements have been made, making sure that we learn about that and we embed that into future practice. And I think I got from Claire's contribution just a real sense of urgency that not only have we got our work cut out to change and to influence, but a lot of us are in our own working lives are having to do things differently and having to do things quickly, and that's actually quite a challenge for individuals, for organisations, and for sectors. In a minute, I'm going to hand back over to Anna, who is going to just explain what happens next and talk a little bit about the future of series of webinars. I think I'll close by just asking Ben if there's anything in the chat box which perhaps we haven't brought out in the discussion. Any kind of points, pithy reflections, Twitter quotable remarks that anybody's made, which perhaps
there's a couple of interesting points that have been coming out towards the end. Some people have been talking about the challenges of influencing decisions made at speed and making sure particularly that the voices of people who they work with are heard in those quick decision-making processes. And someone else has talked about the challenges of engaging more generally and making sure that people who value that participatory approach to policy development, the challenges of doing that at a time when it's more difficult to be in touch with people. And then a final comment from David Smith saying that political parties need to rewrite their manifestos in light of COVID-19 and future pandemics, which of course is similar to what Martin had been saying from a voluntary sector point of view as well. So I think reminding ourselves that obviously there'll be flux in those areas as well that would be helpful to engage with.
Thanks, Ben. So I think a really rich, interesting discussion, a lot in there for us to be positive about, but I think a lot of sobering challenges and problems that all of us need to work together to address. So thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Anna, who's just going to say a few words about what happens next.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody for such a rich conversation and all the chat that's been it's been fascinating for me anyway. So we'll be collating the comments you've made. As I say, there'll be a summary blog, thanks to Jess Blair, next week, and we will be producing reports over the next few weeks as well, summarising the issues with a final report at the end of June. So next week, by popular demand, we have a session on climate change, and then a final session on the 18th of June will be on the wellbeing economy. So these two sessions are a little bit more about looking ahead at some of the issues facing society, rather than so much the issues we're currently discussing specific to how we do things in our sector. We'll also be releasing 3 think pieces over the next few weeks on relating to also Brexit and COVID-19 response, and those will be on, again, the wellbeing economy, one on climate change, and a further one on health and social care and the role of our sector on responding to those issues. So please do continue the chat with the hashtag ddyfodol, gwahanol Cymru, or different futures Wales. And I'd just like to thank all of the staff in WCVA for getting the session going today as well, and for Steve for his excellent chairing as always, and of course to thank you all again for all your contributions. If you have further comments as well that you want to send in directly to us, you can see that there's an email address there, policyteam@wcva.cymru. So I think that's over. That's it for us. You can carry on typing things in the chat, I think, after the meeting. But yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to Steve for finishing before time.